The soldiers' duty is to move to the sound of the guns. And they were looking for a fight. We have no idea who or what's up here. So I say, fix bayonets. I was not fearful. I was exposing myself time and again. Then I say, follow me. And I lead the assault. I'm the first guy out of the trench.
You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade.
To meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
I was born at Fort Benning, Georgia. My father was one of the first Puerto Ricans to ever attend West Point. His service was initially in the U.S., and then he was assigned to Puerto Rico in like 1939, and so we moved down there, and then World War II came along, and he went overseas, and we stayed there. So from 1939 or late 38 until 1946, I was in Puerto Rico. Spanish was my first language. Fortunately, when I was in grammar school, I was sent to a Catholic school that had American nuns, and a lot of instruction was in English. So I was picking up English even when I was down there. From the time I was a little kid, someone asked me, well, what are you going to do? I'm going to go to West Point and be an Army officer. And I used to play with toy soldiers and mock battles and whatever sandboxes we had. That was sort of inbred in me for some reason.
How did those 4 years at West Point change you and perhaps more importantly, prepare you for the war to come?
First of all, they educated me, and I got what I consider a very good, well-rounded education. We had, in those days, we had a mandated curriculum. It was 60% sciences, physics, electrical engineering, calculus, et cetera, none of which were my favorites. And then the other 40% was the social sciences, psychology, leadership, European or world history, et cetera. English literature, all that was in that 40%. For a short period, I was the number one cadet in military history. I graduated, I think it was 221 out of 658 or something like that. But I didn't try very hard in calculus or mechanics of fluids and mechanics of solids. Every time I hear those terms, I want to upchuck. The first thing that happens, you come out of West Point, you get 30 days leave, and then you report to Fort Benning if you're an infantry officer for a basic course. Then you volunteer for Airborne School, Ranger School, and then you go to a unit somewhere. And in my case, the Army sent me to the Armored Officers Career Course rather than the Infantry Career Course, but I graduated as Distinguished Graduate of the Armored Career Course. So I think as a reward, they let me go to Pathfinder School down at Columbus. My initial assignment after I finished all those was in Germany, in Munich, in the Mechanized Infantry Unit. I was in the same battalion for 3 years. We spent a lot of time in the field in those days. We had 5 Army divisions over there, divided into 2 corps. We took the Russian threat much more seriously than they do now. And we'd be rehearsing, we'd be moving to the border. Every year there would be at least one exercise in the wintertime in which one of our divisions would have a mock war against another one of the divisions, and it would start near the town of Regensburg. The Danube goes through there. And we had to build bridges to go across the Danube, and then we would attack north to a training camp called Hohenfels, and then to another one called Grafenbier. And all that time we were running over Germans' field, over their asphalt and whatever, and occasionally a tank would slide sideways into a house, and it was amazing to me that the Germans would put up with it. I mean, the whole Army Division moving down the roads of little villages and whatever in Germany. It was exciting, and it was good training. I mean, we were getting ready. We all thought that the Russians might come. The best school in the Army for any lieutenant is Ranger School. If I had to choose between the basic course and Ranger School, I'd take Ranger School. Secondly, it's not only knowledge, it's also knowledge about self, how tired and wet and cold and hungry you can be and still keep functioning. which is one of the purposes of Ranger School, to teach you that. But then you learn patrolling, and that's important for lieutenants to know. They got to be leading patrols and how to move quietly, and you're dealing with your peers there. So the influence you exert is not only based on the fact that you're designated patrol leader, it's also on your ability to interact in a positive way with guys who next week will be the patrol leader, and you'll be back there. So you got to learn that. Some people can't deal with that. I was in Germany, and my 3 years were about to be up, and I heard somewhere that Special Forces had units in Laos. And somewhere along the way, I picked up what allegedly Napoleon said to his generals when one of them came to him and said, "General, I have this circumstance, what should I do?" And Napoleon said, "A soldier's duty is to move to the side of the guns." And that has been my mantra. In my military career, I volunteered. I went to Vietnam 3 times and volunteered a 4th time until 2 generals talked me out of it. It was near the end of the war, and they said, "You really don't want to go, well, there's a mess and whatever." And so when I heard about Laos, I volunteered for Special Forces. And they were growing it at the time, so they said, "Oh, welcome." So I went to Fort Bragg and went through the school. After a number of months, I got to come out of an A team, and I went to Vietnam, either the southern part of I Corps or the northern part of 2 Corps. My Special Forces camp was right on the borderline. It was near the Laotian border, and it's famous because the first Medal of Honor was earned not by anyone in my detachment, but Roger Donlin was the first American to win a Medal of Honor in Vietnam. And I did my 6 months. When I came back, I trained Roger's detachment back at Bragg because he was going back to replace a guy that replaced me. I'm convinced that the reason his camp got attacked so severely was because of something I did in my tour, and they were trying to get even. I had gone on a reconnaissance flight in the little L-19 airplane, those paper airplanes, flew around my area, and I saw some smoke coming up out of the woods. This was an area where 2 ridges met, and wherever 2 ridges meet, there's water flow. So that looked like a nasty smoke. So there's something going on there. So I took a patrol, walked 2 days halfway up the mountain. And the reason you do that is because the enemy always guards the ridge tops and the streamlines, but they can't guard the side of the mountain. It was hard. It's hard walking the side of the mountain, grabbing branches so you don't fall and whatever, but we made it almost to their camp. And we're about 100 yards away when a shot goes off. And by the time we get into the camp, they had vacated. We had lots of remnants of military stuff, and it seemed to me to be a training site. So I knew they'd have to come back to see what we did at some point. So I took 8 of us, and we stayed in the camp. I had like 60 or 70 people with me, and we the other ones pulled back to make them think we withdrew. And I spent a miserable night. It was raining. Up in the Central Highlands, it gets down to the 60s, and you get wet and whatever. And early the following morning, they came trooping back in, and we had set up this Claymore mine down the path. When I saw them, enough of them in the camp, I blew the Claymore mines, and they ran like hell. And I think the attack on Nam Dong was retaliation for what we did to them, which wouldn't be unusual.
The battle for Landing Zone X-Ray as part of the battle at Drang in Vietnam. This is November 1965, and your superior officer, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, was told that there was concern about a attack coming from the enemy. So what was the American plan to head that off?
Go back a couple of months, 3 months, and the North Vietnamese start marching a division down from Hanoi. And for 3 months, they're on that Ho Chi Minh Trail. And they carry I'd guess 70% of everything that they use, they carry down there. And some of it's held by women. They're pushing bicycles which are loaded with stuff down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And they built camp, if you will, in Cambodia, a little bit south of where Pleiku is. And we had learned about that. They wanted to follow, they being the Viet Minh, thought they would follow sort of a standard playbook of theirs, which they had used against the French very successfully time and time again. And that is to put a outpost under siege and squeeze them so the French would be enticed to come and rescue them. They didn't care about the outpost, they cared about the rescue force. And they would ambush the rescue force. They didn't realize the mobility we had in the first Cav, and they were looking for a fight. There was a special forces camp called Play Me between Pleiku and where we were near the Ia Drang Valley. And so the Vietnamese infiltrated, and their plan is to attack Play Me. There's a relief column, there's a road that comes from Pleiku, and they were going to attack that relief column, and then they would take Pleiku, and that would be a severe blow to the Vietnamese because they would divide a major highway. What they didn't know was that we could move our artillery around and our infantry around in choppers quickly. Someone, either American Vietnamese Army, figured out what was about to happen, and we moved artillery about 10 kilometers away from the road that came down from Pleiku. The NVA didn't know that. The choppers came in, Chinooks carrying artillery came in low, parked the guns down there about 10 k's away. When the enemy started moving towards our road, we also called for air support, and we had fighter jets stacked. So sure enough, they launched their attack, and the artillery comes and just bombs the hell out of them. Then the Air Force drops napalm all over, and they withdraw, leaving a lot of bad guys behind. That sort of stopped the efforts to attack Play Me. They had been attacking Play Me for a couple of weeks prior to that, making probing attacks and whatever. So then the issue became, let's find and wipe those guys out. We capture someone who provides some intelligence about, well, you know this big ridge that runs from the Cambodia into Vietnam? That's where they're hiding. Hal calls us, and the company commanders and the chopper pilots, and says, okay, we've got to do a recce out in that area. And so we fly around and find a landing zone, which is landing zone X-ray. Landing zone X-ray is a small landing zone. It could only take, I think, 6 ships at a time. And it has this big ridge, Chubal Mountain, is adjacent to it by, well, maybe there might be 100 yards between this landing zone and Chubal Mountain, which goes up probably to 5,000 feet or something, and runs the whole 30, 40 miles that way. We have no idea who or what's up here. And the Lord was on our side on that day, because the first choppers to land capture a North Vietnamese soldier who was walking around the landing zone. We had an interrogator with us, and we started asking the kid questions. You know, why are you here? Well, I'm lost. I'm not sure he was lost, he was deserting. I said, well, where's your unit? He points to the ridge, and he points just across a clearing, you know, maybe 200 yards away. So how many are there? Well, there's 2 battalions there, and there's 2 more over there. Hal Moore, who was the best soldier I ever met, said, this game is over. We have a new game now, and that's called Survival 17th Cav. Our primary mission now is to hold this landing zone, because if we lose the landing zone, we won't get resupplied, we won't get a medevac, we won't get command and control, won't be the same. So the mission became hold the landing zone. B Company had already landed. Then an event took place that really affected everything, and that was B Company sent a platoon out to reconnoiter ahead. And the young lieutenant, they got, I don't know, maybe 300-400 meters out there. And the young lieutenant saw a small group of enemies, and he wanted to capture them. So the platoon goes running after them, and the NVA come on behind them and cut them off. So now we've got this platoon out there. Eventually, one of the heroes of this battle is named Ernie Savage. And it was a Sergeant E5. The platoon leader was killed. Platoon sergeant was killed. All the ranking squad leaders were killed or wounded. And command evolves down to Ernie Savage. At age 25, does everything right. He takes a radio, he calls artillery, concentrations all around his position. He spends the night, he has a medic who was put in for a CMH, should have gotten it, because the kid kept moving, any fire, and he'd go over there and take advantage of a dead guy to put on a live guy who had been hit, expose himself but between the time he took over and the time he was rescued, and not another American soldier was wounded or died. And that's much to, here's a young man with no prior combat experience, and he remembered everything that he was taught to do and did it well. Guy's a great guy and a good friend of mine. And during that time, my company arrives, and then Charlie Company arrives, and our weapons company arrives. We're just under strength. If this is Chupong Mountain, and the creek bed comes this way, we only have enough troops to guard, let's say, 3/4 of a circle. The back end of LZ-Xray is open because we didn't have enough people to cover it. Eventually, near the end of the day, I get the order to coordinate with B Company, and we're going to assault together. First thing I do is I try and get artillery fire to prep the path ahead of us. The intricacies of fire control, I hope the Army has solved this. There was only one radio frequency assigned to the battalion for the 4 FOs to use to control fire. Well, B Company had gotten the order first, so they're very assertive young FO, got on the radio and started calling artillery fire. When I tried to call artillery fire, the response to my FO was, get off the net, we're firing a fire mission. My company never got, initially, preparatory fire that we're supposed to have. Once my company got settled and they started moving forward a bit, there was a firefight up close and personal because the bad guys had been crawling up to the grass. I lost all 3 rifle platoon leaders during that fight. Joe Moore won the Medal of Honor attacking a machine gun nest, and 2 others were killed. When I bring my last platoon up to the line, after coming out of choppers, I had to wait for them to land so I could take them to where they're supposed to be. I see a platoon sergeant of the 3rd platoon lying out there next to B Company. I said, where's Lieutenant Taft? And they say, so Lieutenant Taft is dead. And so, where is he? So, well, he's out in the creek bed. I told everyone, we will not leave anyone behind. So I grabbed my RTO, Comma Sergeant, and said, let's go get him. John Herron, who was next to me, the company commander, said, that's dangerous. You get killed. You got to understand my mindset. My mindset is the other 2 company commanders have been in command for 1.5 years back at Fort Benning. I had taken command of that company in Vietnam 30 days prior to LZ-Xray. The soldiers didn't know me. I didn't know much about them. The issue becomes, do they have confidence? How do I build confidence that I am worthy of their support, following my orders, that I'm professional at what I do? I told Sergeant Gale, let's go get him. And I get in the creek bed, and there's bullets overhead as we walk into the creek bed. Again, the creek bed, go up a ways. I find Lieutenant Taft's body, but there's another soldier in there who got left behind. He's alive. My mind is so squirrely that I grab Lieutenant Taft, because I guess in my thought process, that's who I went out to get. And I bring him back knowing that I have to go back a second time. And I used to say that the Vietnamese, it's a good thing there were no baseball players in Vietnam because they didn't have good arms to throw those grenades. And they were all landing short of the creek bed. I'm down here and you could see this things exploding on the edge of the creek bed as I was pulling out the second soldier. I could hear machine gun fire over in my left flank. I get my guys together in the creek bed. When I get the command to move out, and I give them a little pep talk about, those are your buddies, I guess you hang out with, whatever, over in B Company, you know them all, etc. We're going to go get them. And the response from the soldiers is wonderful. They say, carry on, let's go, whatever. So I say, fix bayonets. So they fix bayonets, and I say, follow me. And I lead the assault. I'm the first guy out of the trench. There were 5 of us. A machine gun opens up. I'm talking to this guy, my forward observer. And I'm talking to him. He has a strap across his chest with an M2 compass on there. When I see that thing explode, boom, he dies. This guy dies next to him. This is Jack Gell, my good friend's commissar sergeant. He dies. This guy and this guy, John Clark, my other radio operator, and I survive unscathed. Now, I can't explain it. I think about this daily, Dear Lord, why me? I would almost say I'd rather it have been me. I can pretty truthfully say that whole day, I was not fearful. I was exposing myself time and again. When the last part of the story about these guys dying, I stayed out there. I gave the order, since we wouldn't get artillery support initially, since we couldn't go forward, I tell people to withdraw. And they started coming back. I stayed out there. I was the first guy out, and I was the last guy back. And they saw me. And I think that started building the relationship between those guys and I, which exists to this day. The first thing to realize is that we were outnumbered infantrymen, but we were far superior in other forms of firepower. We had started out with 2 batteries of artillery. Eventually, a 3rd battery was brought in. We had an Air Force FAC on the ground with us, forward air controller, a young lieutenant. There's no job an Air Force lieutenant hates more than being a ground commander's forward air controller. But he was a nice kid. He did a good job. It was like watching an air show. I mean, there were the A-1Es, which are the World War II, late World War II Korean War prop airplane. The best airplane of all the ones that flew that day for delivering close air support, because it flew low, slow, and accurate, could drop its bombs accurately. We had F-4s, and they came in too fast, and nobody knew where the bombs were going to land. We had A-6s. We had, the panoply of Navy and Air Force fighter jets were all there. So that certainly scares the hell out of the bad guys. And they were dropping bomblets, these blue things that are now, I guess, declared illegal or something. More than anything else, it was the firepower that kept us alive. They didn't have weapons to fire, artillery fire that would go into the creek bed or around the creek bed. So it had to be rifles and machine guns for them. We had a large advantage, but they were motivated, well-trained, committed. They were good soldiers.
If you're enjoying this video, you should join our exclusive Patreon community to receive early access to videos each week, the chance to send questions to our heroes, and much more. We scour the country to identify, film, share, and preserve these first-hand battlefield accounts, and time is of the essence. To join our mission, visit patreon.com/American Veterans Center or click the link in our description. It's up to each of us to guard their legacy and honor their sacrifice. Thanks, and now back to the interview.
Fortunately, I survived, and I was put in for a Distinguished Service Cross by Hal Moore. Some dodo at the Army turned it down. I'm 86 years old, so when I go to my grave here in a couple of years or whenever, they didn't get to make a rat's ass. And they didn't ask me what medals I had. But I resent the fact that some guy at DA overrode the desires of my battalion commander, eventually a 3-star general, who was really super soldier. I will say that because of the way I led that company during that battle, we created a really good team, and it exists to this day. We're probably the only unit in Vietnam that has a battalion-sized annual reunion, and where we've gotten to know each other's kids and whatever, and they bring their families, and we probably have the lowest rate of PTSD of any units I've gone through is what we have. And I attribute that, number one, the unit was well-trained and had been together for a year and a half prior to deploying to Vietnam. And secondly, the reunions keep relationships going